first thing I saw, like touring musician for 4 years and whatever. And I was like, yeah. Let me check this out. And my God, like it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like the Specials meets, what's that? Not that Mank band.
It's like, the Happy Mondays meets the Beastie Boys meets the Specials meets a little bit of northern jangly guitar.
Really, really cool. Really cool. Anyway, Felix, I have absolutely no idea where to start with you because you've done so many crazy different things. And I kind of feel, I feel totally unqualified to even speak to you, to be honest. I thought it would be simple because, of course, you know, you think, okay, the Hotwheels connection, that's going to be, sorry, this must be really off-putting. Let me just see if I can adjust my webcam quickly. 1 second.
Cool. I'm just going to fiddle with my volume. You're very quiet to me as well for some reason. I don't know whether it's my end or yours.
Hold on, it might be mine. 1 second. Is that better?
Oh, yeah, that's whoa.
Okay, is it too much? Whoa.
No, it's great. It's perfect. I feel like you're in the room with me now.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Yeah, I was just I was really blown away. It was really, really cool. And that music video that you guys did on the Torch song, where was that? Where did you film that?
Torch song music video. Which one?
Yeah, there's a guy like breakdancing in the center of the room, and his vest he's wearing like a wife beater vest, and it's glowing like luminous colors, neon colors.
Oh yeah, I think it's funny that video, like, so there's a whole story, right? That we were the band. You meet anybody who's been in a band and they're like, oh yeah, you know, we've got all these stories. We nearly made it. We nearly got a deal, but we were the band that really should have been enormous, and through just a succession of happenstance, never really made it. And so there was a period of time when we had fallen out and weren't really doing anything. And my best friend Arlo, who's been in every band I've ever been in, and I grew up with him I met him when I was 3. His son had got into kind of video editing, and at the time Billy was very young. Billy was, I think, maybe 12 or 13, and he banged that video together just as a kind of school project, and it was thrown up because we weren't doing anything else.
Okay.
I can't remember. Is it the one where there's like a trumpet keeps appearing in it and things?
Exactly. Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
So that was just it was kind of just a homegrown experiment that we let at the time. We'd kind of given up really on doing anything else as a band, and it was just free reign a little bit, which is great. I mean, the fact that Billy was 12 or 13 and put that video together is rad. But we've since reformed, and we're just in the middle of finishing the album 20 years late.
Oh, right.
But that's the beauty of the modern world, right? I mean, the band were huge. We were on Radio 1 every night. We did the first Maida Vale session for Steve Lamacq of the 2000s. We played Reading and Leeds. We supported a lot of big bands. We did a lot of we were like the next big thing.
Sorry, Felix. 1 second. Can you just adjust the angle of your screen a little bit, just so it's? Can you?
Which way?
No, sorry. Vertically. A little. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. That's fine.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Perfect.
So yeah, I'll tell you what. I'm going to bring it just so you can see the dirty white ceiling up.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, we can crop it out. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was one of those things, and it was all before the birth of iTunes and the idea of self-publishing, well before YouTube. And in a way, that was part of our downfall. Was the entire music industry was going through this seismic shift as iTunes and the iTunes Store and the idea of self-publishing was beginning to take. I mean, this is in the days of Napster, right? But the whole music industry was having a freak out.
But sorry, what period was it? This was like late 90s, right? Early 2000s.
This is early 2000s.
Okay.
I left my role with Hotwheels in '99 to go full-time musician at the end of '99. So this was Yeah, and we survived for 4 or 5 years until we just eventually ran out of emotional steam, really. But in that period, the music industry changed fundamentally, and we just missed the boat. I think if we were a bit immature, but also if the tools available to people now, and we'll come back to this as it relates to design as well. If the tools available to people now, oh, that's better. Wow, now suddenly
okay,
you've
there we go.
moody
Sorry.
and
yeah. Okay. Now you can see me. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that was off-putting. Okay. Yeah. Carry on.
So yeah, it's a story of in a way, it's a story of the band that was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now the beauty of it all is that now, as we're all in our late 40s, that's the optimistic view. Really, it's pushing 50, but late 40s. We'll stick with that. But it allows us to now. I'm in Los Angeles. The rest of the boys are in the northeast of England. Actually,
is it Newcastle?
Scotland, and it allows us to continue to collaborate and actually self-publish and the rest of it. So we're in the middle of finishing what we started 20 years ago.
Unbelievable. Well, we'll definitely come back to that because it's absolutely fascinating. I think there's only one other designer that I'm aware of that when they say, I was in a band or whatever that, and is Rob Dickinson.
Yeah.
Who's was the only other person that I thought was credible enough to say I was a musician.
And the irony there, or the coincidence there, is that I've met Rob. I think I've met Rob twice. I don't know him, but I've met him through the kind of Los Angeles Porsche scene, and I actually supported him when he was in Catherine Wheel in my first band that I was in with Arlo when I was literally just out of school, high school. I can't remember where, but we were on the same circuit. They were, they had a deal and they had records out, but we used to support bands like Catherine Wheel. And I cannot remember where we supported Catherine Wheel, but at some point we supported Catherine Wheel back in 1990, 91, something like that.
Unreal.
Small world for us kind of car design indie rock musicians,
Very, very. I'm going to ask you something completely left field, and it will just be in and out because it's not going to make sense to anybody. But many years ago, I worked when I first got to England. I was working in a hotel in Surrey, and there was Geordie that it was the first time I come across the whole Geordie Newcastle thing, and his name was Paul Burns. Do you, by any chance, know that person? Because I ask this. It sounds ridiculous because it's like saying, "Do you know John Smith?" Somebody from England. Yeah. But every person that I've spoken to from Newcastle knows who he is. A lot of people called him the Angel of the North. He's he was this big, heavy set dude, but just heart of gold, super nice guy. And he became friends with a lot of I think he passed away. I think it was drug related. I don't know. But it was quite a high profile thing. It was all over in the papers and everything. Do you by any chance know that person or not?
The name rings a bell. Yeah. I through my years, I was involved in the club scene in Newcastle and the music scene in Newcastle for a lot of years. And I met a lot of people. I know I've got similar tales where I've met someone in Hong Kong and said, "Oh, if you're ever in Newcastle, go to the 4th Hotel on Pink Lane and ask for Felix, and someone will know where I am." And of course, I was literally the only guy in Newcastle called Felix, so it was real easy. But I also just happened to be I promoted club nights. I was involved with the entire music scene. Paul Burns rings a bell. I can't say that I can't immediately be "Oh yeah, Paul Burns, I know him."
I think he's give or take, I'm about, I don't know, I'm 37, and I think he's maybe a couple of years older than me, or was a couple of years older than me. And so it's it's after your time, but for some reason he was very, very well-known person in that area.
It's one of those things, right? I'll get off of this and get on Facebook and say, "Does anybody know Paul Burns?" And all my friends will be like, "Yeah, man,
right,
Paul Burns." Can I remember Paul Burns? And I'm like, that guy. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so Felix, you grew up you born and raised in Newcastle, England. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was.
Okay.
I mean, technically, I was born in Hexham, which is a little up the Tyne Valley, but
Okay.
I am born and raised northeast, outskirts of Newcastle. Then, from the age of like 19 onwards, I lived in the centre of Newcastle. I grew up in a kind of mining village, Wrighton and Crowcrook on the west side of the city, south side of the valley, more Gateshead really. But yeah, northeast mining village. Nothing particularly special about it, other than it was very pretty. Could see the Roman wall across the valley from my house, and I can wax lyrical about Tyneside and the Tyne Valley for a long time, and was very very fortunate in that my dad was an engineer. My mom had studied fashion at what was Newcastle Poly at the time, which then became Northumbria. When actually the year I joined, it became Northumbria University. And my dad was an engineer working in the oil industry, and so I was fortunate in that my dad, had a good salary. We were comfortable, not wealthy, but comfortable. And I lived where I grew up was right on the edge of the Tyneside conurbation. So if you turned left out the door when you left the house, you could walk all the way to the coast and just being built up gradually all the way through the Tyneside conurbation. But if you turned right, you would walk and you wouldn't be in a city until you hit the west coast. So it was like I was right on that cusp between wild countryside and the gritty get Carter landscape of
Wow,
Newcastle upon
that's
Tyne in the 70s and 80s.
fascinating. I mean, that's like the perfect balance, really, isn't it? Because then when you're old enough, of course, you can venture into the city, but
Yeah,
you're exposed to the great outdoors as a
yeah,
youngster.
absolutely. Newcastle was a rad city as well. It's a very small city. I mean, going back to the "Do you know Paul Burns" discussion, and I think anybody who ever studied in Newcastle would tell you the same thing. Is it's a big city in that it's got this fantastic reputation for entertainment and culture and industrial heritage, but it's a very small city, and so you very quickly get to know everybody. You can be a big fish in a small pond really quite easily, which is probably where I excel. So yeah, it's a really wonderful place.
Um, Tell me something. I've heard that I've unfortunately never been. I had a trip actually to go and see Paul Burns, and it never happened, unfortunately. But I've heard that Geordies are some of the most friendly people in the world, and that's whenever I meet them, it is like that. But they are definitely not to be undermined or messed with. Hence the famous expression, Geordie cares. How is it that rough? Like on a Friday, Saturday night?
Um, it's funny, yes, but also the polar opposite, right? It's a lot less intimidating than it used to be, right? Like when I grew up, it was there were whole tracts of the city you didn't want to find yourself in. Um, I've got hilarious stories of being chased through the West End of Newcastle in my 1979 Volkswagen Passat with my friends at the age of like 18 or 19, and getting lost and being chased by these gangsters in a Sierra Cosworth.
My God.
um, but the thing, I would never do Newcastle down in saying it's not a badge of honor. Newcastle just was in the 70s and 80s and 90s. It was like, yeah, man, it's a rough city, but it's also one of the warmest. I honestly believe it's the warmest place I've ever been. Like in terms of friendliness and um, people will do anything for you. You can be immediately friends with Paul Burns from one meeting, and I think that what the grim side of Newcastle and many northern cities, it's not just Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, all of that, but it gives you a very like a real no bullshit look on life, where you haven't got time for frippery. It's like, look, this is how the world is, and this is how life is, and this is how we talk to each other, and we're very honest and open, and everything is tinged with humor. Which I learned as I left Newcastle, went out in the world of work. I realized that not everybody shares the same brutal, honest sense of humor, and you have to kind of then start kind of figuring out how to use it when appropriate. But I mean, I've been in Los Angeles now for 16 years, and I still joke that my accent is the only thing I've really got, and nobody understands what I'm saying, but they like to listen, and so they keep coming back for more. But Newcastle's a I couldn't be prouder of coming from Newcastle in the northeast of England. It's got everything. It's a melting pot of history and culture and people, and also for long. And it also ties into the band story. Was that Newcastle was really an outpost. It's the most northern English city. It was as far from London as you could get if you were in the arts, whether you were in music or design. You were kind of annexed, and so you developed your own way of doing things and your own culture. That also had a lot of barriers to success because it was also more expensive for anybody to get from Newcastle to London than any of your competitors, whether you were a graduate looking for your first job or whether you're a touring rock and roll band. It took effort to have that, especially in the days before cell phones and internet. It took a lot of effort to stay connected and go and find what was going on in the real world, so to speak. But I wouldn't have it any other way. It made me, being from Newcastle, made me who I am.
Those restrictions are often the thing that, as you said, become your drivers to your motivation and gives you that fire to go out and, number one, make up your mind about what you want to do, and then commit and just grind. Would you say?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think certainly, it's funny. I mean, I can't speak for. I guess winding it all the way back, right? I've always been into cars. My dad was into cars. Some of my earliest memories are he had a Ford Anglia, which is still one of my favorite. It's a very strange car, a Ford Anglia, but it's one of my favorite cars.
My nephew, who's 13 years old, owns one in Cape Town.
Excellent, good lad.
Yeah,
good lad. I still haven't got one. Out of all the cars I've had, I still lust after Ford Anglias, and but that was my earliest memories. And then my dad had at some point he bought an Alfa Junior 1300 Junior GT. Can't remember what year it was. It was probably about a 67 or something, 68, I would imagine. And he got me into car. He would bring car magazines back off the rigs when I was just a lad. When I was just little, he brought me kind of like the first edition of. It was either Street Machine magazine or Custom Car magazine, which were the UK hot rod magazines. But I didn't know. Firstly, I didn't really have many other friends who were into cars. As I got older, I discovered more lads who were into cars. But I never had a car gang. I never had a tinkering with cars in the evening in our teens or anything like that. And the other side of it was that it was very difficult to go and take part in any side of car culture. There was nothing in the Northeast. There was no car shows. There was no drag strip. There was no racetrack. We took a family holiday when I was little to go and see my gran lived in Oxford, in Abingdon near Oxford, and the whole point of it was to go to Bewley Auto Museum but it had to be a family holiday to go to Bewley Auto Museum, and so. I had magazines, and I had a couple of relatives who were into cars. I had one crazy kind of, my aunt was living with a guy who was really into cars. He was a bit of a kind of old hippie, but he kind of turned me on to Volkswagens. And I used to go and explore with that. I'd go and stay with them in the countryside up near Alston, which is way west of like 45 miles west of Newcastle. But that at the time was where it was the wilds, right? It was where there was farmhouses and farmyards full of 50s and 60s cars rotting into the ground.
Wow. Because
those farmers at the time, they would be the local scrap man as well. And so that was how I got my fill of car culture. But being in Newcastle was very difficult. You were removed from a lot of stuff, and I always lusted after the South, not because I wanted to live in the South and be Southern, but just there was so much opportunity. The weather seemed to be nicer for a start, which it was. But as I got into kind of, I got really obsessed in my late teens with the kind of Cal Look Volkswagen scene, and I saw kids who were not much older than me cruising Cal Look bugs and buses, and there was a whole scene, and they all seemed to be into it. It was a social scene to have, a cool car. Whereas in the Northeast, it was all about, XR3s and GTIs and going to raves, and that was fine. I enjoyed that as well. It was a bit more rally culture, street racing and rally culture in the Northeast than kind of custom culture, and which again is all good.
Where did your artistic side come from? Was that something that was also kind of brewing in parallel, and you later on decided to merge those two things? Or
yeah, I think I always drew, like as soon as I could hold a pen, I was drawing things. And there's a rich vein of creativity that runs through both sides of my family. And my mom, like I said, my mom studied fashion design. She never got a career in fashion design because she got pregnant with me in her final year at Newcastle Poly, and was very young and became a young mother. And there was no way of supporting myself, and then my brother came along 2.5 years later. But so I was surrounded. But she would design clothes for friends, and I was very connected. She had friends who were connected to that world. There was quite a famous British designer, Nigel Cabourn, was her buddy at college. They graduated together, and so my early memories of being amongst this kind of Newcastle fashion set. And she could obviously draw. She'd argue with me that she couldn't, but she could very well. But my dad was actually, even though he was an engineer, he seemed to understand art theory a lot more, and he taught me a lot just about technique. And then we actually owned an art gallery. It's so weird, man. We owned an art gallery. We bought a house when I was 6, and we moved into this kind of dilapidated old house that was sprawling, but it had a shop on the ground floor that the house was kind of built over and behind. And for a long time, it was like, what do we do with this huge shop? Do we turn it into part of the house? And then my mom and dad decided to make an art gallery. And so, the least likely village of Crawcrook got an art gallery, but I got exposed for a couple of years to a lot of the kind of up and coming and well-known Northeast artists. And so at that point, I think, certainly on the pure art side, I got an education. I knew of careers in design, and I knew of car design from quite an early age. I loved cars. I loved to draw cars. I always drew cars. I've got look, let's check this out. I found these the other day. Right, that's Felix age. I guess I was probably about 7.
no,
Probably about 7 years old. I don't know what. I would imagine it was whenever Eliminator by ZZ Top came out.
my God.
So I would have been, maybe if that came out in 81, maybe I was a bit older than 7. Maybe I was like 8 or 9. I don't know. But
Wow.
so I always drew cars, and I wish I could find the stuff that I used to run home. I'm not an athletic lad, but I used to run home because I had these journals, and I would draw a car every night, and I was drawing hot rods. I wasn't trying to design cars. I was just replicating stuff I'd seen in the hot rod magazines. But where was I going with that? Yeah, so I entered a competition. I remember being about 10 years old. I must have been 10. I was in junior school, so probably about 10 or 11. And there was GM. I think it was actually Opel, had a schoolboy car design competition, which was, they did regional heats, and I entered it, and I placed top. I won it for my age group, for the Northeast, and I won a computer for the school, like a ZX Spectrum for the school, and a book token for myself. It wasn't, and then I realized that exposure made me go, oh shit, car design's a job that I could do. And from that moment on, all I wanted to be was a car designer. But then I ran into, trying to find where to go and study car design was very difficult. And even when it got to, you're kind of 17 or 18 doing your A-levels in the UK, and then you have to start deciding where you're going to go to study because it's just part of the process of applications. And nobody at my school, none of the teachers who were involved in careers and helping the sixth form through that process understood that there was an entirely separate application process for design courses. So the only thing offered to me was architecture, and I was like, I guess maybe architecture is a way into being a designer, because architecture generally is universities. And then so it was like UCA and PCAS, and one of them was the university application process, and one of them was the polytechnic application process. But nobody knew that the design courses were through an entirely different application process. And I just nearly, at this point, I'd started getting into bands, and I nearly didn't go any further. I nearly just took I had a job as a care worker lined up so I could continue in the band, because the band, this is when I was like 18, the band I was in, the same band that supported Catherine Wheel, we were getting into NME, and we'd done a single that was critically acclaimed. And I was like, I just want to be in a band. I've done with school. And there was no one saying, no, but you could be a brilliant designer. Like, go here. And then, just as a pure fluke, I applied and I failed my A-levels. I was into rock and roll and all sorts of the things that go along with rock and roll, and I'd passed my driving test. And so I'd far rather be out exploring the countryside in my 1979 Passat GLS with my friends than actually studying. And I applied to a foundation course. Newcastle College had a good art foundation course. And at the very last minute, they accepted me. They gave me an unconditional offer. And at the very last minute, my mom convinced me to go on the first day, because I was like, I'm done. She was screaming rows with my parents. I'm done. I'm going to be in a rock and roll band.
Okay, so they were not keen on that idea.
What, the rock and roll idea?
Yes.
No, I mean, they had thankfully they had a bit more of a maturity than an angry rock and roll fueled 17-year-old. And my mom was like, just give it a try. My mom believed in me. My dad believed in me. They knew, and my school teachers knew that I was really very good. But the art foundation course was the only thing, because I'd failed my A-levels, or because it didn't look like I was going to I didn't fail them. I got a D in art. I failed everything else. I got a D in art. Let that be a lesson to your kids. And so at the very last minute, I went to college on this art foundation course, not knowing anything about the design world, not really knowing what I wanted to do. I was a little bit addled at that point. Rock and roll was great because it was something that was just intuitive for me. I didn't have to get onto the career bandwagon or anything, but it was the best thing I ever did. And from day one, I walked in and just suddenly realized that I was not the odd guy. Like in school, I was the only guy who was gonna. I mean, actually, there was a couple of other friends from school who also went on to this college, right? So I wasn't the only person at school. A couple of the girls that I knew also went on to do art, but I realized that I'd felt that I didn't have anybody to talk to when I was at school. Everybody knew that I was into graffiti. It's another one. This is funny. I didn't do this in prep for the interview, but I realized after I'd had the initial emails with you that I had also just found, that's Felix, 17 years old.
Slowly, lift it up. Let's see it again. Slowly.
Hold on a second, I'm trying to get it there.
Oh, okay.
So this was me at 17, 18.
Wow.
And obviously some of that made it onto walls somewhere in the world.
Cool.
And so we had this kind of we were passionate about that side of art, and we were passionate about album covers and records and street art and that side of things. But in terms of talking design and being fascinated with what design meant, it was looked at as a little bit kind of, a little bit hoity-toity, a little bit square. Like, who's that? What's he on about? He's a bit posh. Talking about design. Well, of course he talks about design. His parents have got a Golf Cabriolet, But then when I went to college, I was like, oh shit, there's another 100 people of my age from all over the country, and all they want to talk about is design and who their favorite artist is, and go and take recreational substances and work together on collaborative projects, and it suddenly it didn't take. I honestly don't think it took more than a couple of days for me to be absolutely locked in on this is who I am and this is what I want to do. And of course, it's all, you know, it's all complementary to the music side of things. So the first couple of semesters doing that, you were very broad. You did photography, fashion, graphic design, 3D design, which was as close as they got to industrial design. And you did a lot of art history and a lot of design history. And in the final part of the year, you focused on what is it you really want to do, and you put a portfolio together to go and apply for university. And my teacher was I was like, I just want to be a car designer. I want to go to Coventry. I want to be a car designer. I want to go to Coventry. That's all And he was like, no. He's like, you want to be an industrial designer, and then if you still want to be a car designer, then go and do a master's. But you should be an industrial designer. And then, of course, the music side of things reared its head again, and the band was getting better and better. I was like, I want to stay in Newcastle. I don't care about Coventry. I want to stay in Newcastle because my band's really good. And so Northumbria was the only option. And so I applied for design for industry at Northumbria. And at the time, I think there was only Coventry that had a car design course. In terms of an undergraduate course. And so I was like, all right, industrial design. And I will just do as much car stuff as I can studying industrial design. So there's a whole story. I got on that course and proceeded to spend 4 years doing as little as possible work while I ran club nights and played in bands and fixed classic cars and hung out with fashion students. And eventually graduated Northumbria. It's a 4-year course. You do industrial placements, and I didn't do an industrial placement because I was running nightclubs every summer. And, you know, much later in life realized that was a far better education for me than going and sitting, you know, as a junior in a design office for 3 months somewhere in the world. You know, that's where I learned about, you know, marketing on a very street level. Like if you've got to put 1,500 people in a nightclub every Friday to pay your rent, then, you know, and if you do a bad job, you only got 200 people, you very quickly learn the bare bones of marketing and commerce and business. But also I was completely submerged in a far broader scope of culture rather than a very narrow, you know, I'm an industrial designer, you know, rock and roll, fashion, music, video, content creation, all of that. And so, you know, after 4 years, I came out with a mediocre degree. I got I think I got a 2.2. I can't even remember. I think it was a 2.2. Was I got a 2? No, it was a 2.2. Nearly got a 2.1. I can't even remember the terminology now, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's accurate. Yeah.
You can tell where my head was at. And so, I came out of that, and after a kind of short-lived summer of trying to get a job with a consultancy, didn't get any. I wasn't a consultancy guy. I wasn't really a corporate guy. I decided, I was like, look, the path you've always been on is to apply to the RCA. Go and do car design, do a master's in car design at the RCA. One of my lecturers was very good friends with the head of the transport course at RCA. And he was like, look, man, you're a shoo-in. I'll vouch for you. You're the way who you are in your portfolio and your passion, you're a shoo-in. So I was like, right, well, I'll take a year out and I will do some lecturing. So I did a bit of lecturing on the Northumbria course. I did some kind of, you know, prototype model making teaching. And I also took a job in the local college to teach kind of 16-year-olds. I think it was like BTEC art and design. And I did a little bit of freelance. I went down to London and freelanced as a packaging designer because one of my good friends had a good job there. So I did a few months in London as a graduate, earning what seemed like an astronomical amount of money as a freelance packaging designer. But looking back on that, I was just a cocky, lazy shit, really. And then was getting very frustrated with trying to find more work in that year while I was putting my portfolio together, and had basically given up on it. And I was like, right, I'm done. I'm just going to do menial jobs and get my portfolio together. And I kind of completed my portfolio, and I was going through the application process for RCA, and I was sitting on a train on the way to see my dad in Scotland, and I had a copy of Design Week. And at the time, Design Week was like the only publication that you could get your hands on that had any jobs in design listed. And Design Week really was a kind of graphic design and advertising.
It was quite a big publication, right? It was a big, almost. Was it almost like a newspaper size?
Kind of. It was weird. It was on kind of textured print paper. It wasn't glossy. It was a weekly.
Right.
And it was like, I remember it being kind of ordinary magazine size, but it felt a bit more like reading a fanzine or a local. It wasn't, because it was a weekly, it didn't have the high gloss production values.
Right.
A lot of it was advertising for firms. Okay. And then there was a few job listings every week in the back. And I was flicking through it idly on the train, and I spotted a tiny little advert for Hotwheels UK. And it said, it was something like, temp product designer, 6-month contract, apply here, phone number and address, because there was no email then. And so I got that. I remember it was like, I'd literally given up. I'd packed at my mom's office at the time. I had a stack of color photocopied CVs, resumes, and I put them away. I was done. And I rang my mom as soon as I got to Scotland, and I said, Mom, could you do me a favor? Can you grab the top CV from that stack, print out my cover letter, put it in an envelope, and send it to this address? And it was the Hotwheels UK office in Leicester. And I forgot about it. And about 3 weeks later, I got a call to say, could you come for an interview? And I went down and I met the team. It was a very small team who had been Corgi Toys up until literally earlier that year. And I thought I'd done all right. And I had a rusty old Alpha GTV. There's a whole story about all the horrible classic cars that were on their last legs that I owned through university. So I had this rusty old Alfetta GTV, the kind of like an 83. And I managed to limp it down from Newcastle to Leicester and back. And it just so happened that one of the guys interviewing me was really into cars and really into Italian cars. And so we got on like a house on fire. And I think that car probably got me the job. But I went 3 weeks later, they called me. I hadn't heard anything. Suddenly they called me back for a second interview. This is for a 6-month temp job. Second interview, went away again. 3 weeks after that, I got a call with a project. Can you do this project for us? You're down to the final 3. And it was to redesign a Hot Wheels car wash playset. And you had to kind of redesign it, and you had to save 20% of the tooling cost, and you had to rejigger the tooling plan to cut back on 20% of the tooling. And you had to give it an aesthetic refresh, and you had to provide any ideas for how it could be better.
Can we just clarify quickly? This is just to get the job, right? This is not actually paid. This is just to get a job. It's part of
just to get the job. This was a project to decide. Okay, we're down to 3, and what had happened was the other guys were Coventry guys, and they'd come out of Coventry. They could draw. I mean, I can draw cars, but I would never call myself. I'm not up there with the brilliant, artists of the car design world. I can draw a car. And most people will be like, "Holy shit, you just drew that!" But I know I'm not. I was never going to be that guy, unless maybe I would have if I'd gone on to study further. But the good thing about Northumbria Design for Industry, which is how I know our mutual acquaintance Tom Woods, because I believe that Tom studied at Northumbria. Shout out to Tom. Was that I understood how to read a tool plan, and I understood far more about design for manufacturing than just aesthetic or broad concept design. And so I nailed the tool plan. And it was it was real tool plans. It wasn't like, it was tool plans straight from China. Rejigger this, save 20%, redesign the items, give us some recommendations. And so I got the job. And so the whole process to get a temp position at Hot Wheels UK was, really probably about 2.5 to 3 months before I actually got the call that I've got the job. And then I kind of think then I had like 2 weeks to pack everything up and move to Leicester. Maybe even 1 week. It was one of those crazy things. And so, the rusty old Alpha got pushed into service, and I moved down to Leicester and started for a temp job. And very, very quickly realized that not only was it a fascinating job, but I was really good at it. Like, I'd never considered toy design. And obviously Hot Wheels isn't just toy design. It's like the absolute epicenter of car culture for most people of a certain age who kind of grow up liking cars. But I wasn't working on, in the early days, I was just doing like garages and play sets and product. But they gave me a full-time position certainly within the first 3 months, maybe even sooner than that. They were like, dude, you're rocking this. This is your calling, and we would love to take you on full-time because
what was the day-to-day, what was the day in the life in that job like at that time? Was there CAD involved? Was there not CAD? What exactly were you doing?
It was awesome. It was so good. It was so good because it was like we were using vendors for CAD. Very little stuff was done with CAD. Most of it was done with model makers. The fascinating thing about toy design, and we're not talking about the car design side of it. We're not talking about the die-cast side. We're talking about innovation and invention. And that happens with what we would call kit bashing, right? That happens with rubber bands and glue and hot glue guns and bits of plastic to make something work and find the magic. Then you move it on to, back then we would move it on to a professional model maker who would make a very accurate kind of, not a tooling model, but a very accurate functional aesthetic model. And we would pack that up and send it to Hong Kong. And then the engineers in Hong Kong would dissect that and produce. I think at the time they would produce CAD drawings, and they would also get the pantograph out, and they would scale up to build a mold prototype, and then scale down again. And that was a big part of my education. Was that I found myself, the reason they wanted someone in that office was because the two guys, I reported to the design manager and the engineering manager. And both of those guys had just had kids. They were both at the time in their kind of early 30s, and they didn't want to travel anymore. And so I found myself just flying around the world constantly. And it gave me my first real boot camp acceleration of like, you're just going to go and do it. You're going to get on a plane and you're going to fly to Los Angeles and you're going to present to senior management at Mattel. And you're going to get them to buy off on the project that we've just spent 2 months and however many tens of thousands of dollars developing. And once you've got buy-off, you're then going to jump on a plane and fly to Hong Kong, and then you're going to sit down for 2 weeks in Hong Kong, and you're going to work with the engineering team, and you're going to ensure that the integrity of the product makes it through to the final product. But you're also got the chance to find efficiency, so you can add more. Like you can sit down directly with the engineers, and that's what I used to do. I used to spend 2 weeks. It would be like a 3-week trip, right? I would go to Los Angeles or New Jersey, where Matchbox was. And then I would fly out to Hong Kong. And this went on for kind of 3 years of just this kind of like crazy experience of running a full 360. Like I would start with the blank sheet of paper and with some kind of brainstorms, but generally, we had a couple of really good partners who were vendors/inventor partners. And we would work up a concept and we'd get the models made and we would shoot. I started shooting videos because a lot of the product that we did was very complex to explain in person. So I had this little like Sony digital video camera, and I would sit and do almost like stopgap animation of the toys to show how they worked. So, and sometimes I'd do it in the hotel room in Los Angeles the night before the presentation, so that I could literally like stand there. I would always wear a suit, and I was incredibly young, really, compared to most of the guys I was working with. And I would always wear a suit, and I would play the video, and I would narrate the video rather than fumbling around trying to present something that was complex. And then once I'd got that, so my hit rate was very good in terms of approval. And then I would jump on a plane and fly to Hong Kong, and then I would sit, and that's where I got my kind of 101 on the very the gritty end of mass manufacturing and the metrics of mass production and plastic injection molding on a massive scale and die-cast injection and die-cast molding and things. So it was a crazy 3 years, right? Like I was young, single, no strings at all. I employed a couple of friends to work with us over the time. Fraser, who is still my kind of right-hand man, all the way through Hot Wheels was my right-hand man, really, like just brilliant designer. and we just had a laugh. You know, V8 powered Land Rovers in the Leicester countryside, and 16 valve GDIs and video games, and like it was every boy's dream for a few years.
I guess looking back on that now, I mean, the experience that you had in those 3 years in particular, I mean, you probably it probably took a while for you to realize just how amazing that experience was, and how that's probably informed a lot of your big picture thinking and the overview of the whole thing. I mean, in terms of business.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I realized it. I don't know whether I realized it when I left, because I left for 5 years to be in the band. But certainly when I then later moved out to Los Angeles and pick up my career again with Mattel, I realized that I just thought differently to everybody else, you know, because I'd done it so intensely for 3 years. It was drummed into me at an early age in an early part of my career that it became the way I worked. I saw everything globally, not just in terms of around the world, but also in terms of looking at a project, and not just looking at the design part, but looking at the engineering, the manufacturing, the marketing. I got this incredible chance to work with the full 360 of disciplines that it takes to make something. And whether that is a plastic garage, or whether it's a, you know, later on in life, whether it's a, you know, a concept vehicle or whatever, then that became my calling card, was that I'm a synergist. That yes, I'm a designer and I come at everything with a creative bent, but because of all the time I spent with marketing and with manufacturing, it just became, I learned very early how to be that synergist who understands all angles of what makes a successful product, like, and how to take an invention, raw invention or raw innovation, and tweak it to make sure that it succeeds, rather than it just being a good idea that was something wrong with it and it didn't quite hit the right spot for the market. Understand what the market needs and just say, yeah, it's great, but if we just add this, or if we just search for that story, or we just, suddenly it becomes, you know, a best-selling product.
So after those 3 years in Leicester, you decide you want to. What happens at that point that you decide, I still want to give one last stab at this band business?
Well, I'd walked away from it by that point, you know, bands in general, and I got a call. I was in Newcastle. Oh, my best friend Arlo, he called me, and he was like, "Dude," he didn't say "dude" because he's a Geordie. He said, "Man, man, here, man, here, man, kidda. Here, kidda. I've met these lads. You used to know them from the club that we used to run, and I'm in a band with them. You've got to come and listen to this. It's the best band I've ever been in. They're just fucking good." So I drove up at the weekend. Arlo played me the demo tape, and I was like, "Holy shit, that doesn't sound like a local band." I was like, "That's like next level." And Arlo was like, "Look, we need a manager. We've been accepted to play Radio 1 Sound in the City, like new band stage, but we haven't got a manager, and we need someone to deal with like just navigating that, because we're not that good. And you're a professional. You're the only one who's got a job full time. So can you manage the band?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, I'll manage the band." So I immediately went out and bought like every, you know, hardback book I could find about the great managers of all time, and very quickly realized that there was no rules to managing a band. You just had to be a bit of a gangster. And so my intention was to manage the band while I still worked at Mattel. And I was in Los Angeles about 2 weeks before this Radio 1 gig that this band had landed. And I get a phone call or a message or something from Arlo saying, "Oh, the bassist just left and the singer just left. I think we're going to scrap the band." And I was like, whoa, hold on. I was like, "I'll be back on Saturday. I'll drive up on Sunday and we'll figure it out. Don't do anything stupid." And so I literally got off the plane at Heathrow, got back to Leicester. The next morning, jumped in my car, drove to Newcastle, sat down, looked at what we had, listened to the music that they recorded. And I was like, "Look, man, how about this? I'll play bass to get us through this gig, and we'll search for someone who can sing, and then we'll bolster it with," we had a friend who was a good DJ. I was like, we'll bolster it with some like scratching and stuff, and we'll be all right. Because we didn't have a drummer, we used beats. It was all that was the unique thing about the Kustombuilt was for the longest time we used hip hop samples and beats and like northern guitar, jingly jangly kind of psychedelic soul guitar, and so that was the start of the band, and very very quickly on the back of that Radio 1 gig, we got a little bit more interest. It was like Sound City. We weren't. I don't think we were actually on Radio 1. It was just the Sound City kind of showcase. And then very quickly recorded one of the tunes as a demo, and like threw that at Steve Lamacq one night, who we used to run. We were still running nightclubs at the time, and Steve Lamacq was kind of DJing for us. For anybody who doesn't know, Steve Lamacq at the time was like the most influential British indie radio DJ. And we had a big row with him, which resulted in Christian, the front man, kind of bouncing our demo CD off his head and saying, "Here, man, like if James Brown could become James Brown at a time when black people couldn't even sit on a bus in America, then we can be." Because like Steve Lamacq was like, "You don't understand. You're really good, but everyone's really good at your level." And so there was this whole fight about James Brown and segregation, which then led to Steve Lamacq ringing us up on the Monday saying, "Lads, I listened to your demo. You're going to be on the radio tonight because it's exceptional." And I'm still at Mattel at this time. I'm still working full time. And so Christian like rings me on Monday. Like, "We're going to be on the radio tonight. Tell everybody we're going to be on the radio tonight." And then that started this relationship with Steve Lamacq. And this is in probably, this would have been 99. And just at the same time as this is happening, Mattel decided to shut down a lot of their global affiliate design and manufacturing offices. And so they decided to shut down the Leicester office, and they were going to move all design to California. And I was offered two jobs. I was offered a job in New Jersey for Matchbox, and I was offered a job in California for Hotwheels, both management positions. And I was like, "I'm sorry, lads, I've got to go and do. I'm going to take my redundancy. I've got to go and do this. My band's on the radio, and I can't walk away from that. Like legitimately, like every night on the radio, my music's being played. I'm not going to move to America." So I took the redundancy, and at the end of October '99, moved back to Newcastle. And for the next couple of years, it was pretty intense.
My God! So that you pushed on with that for like 4 years, and then
it was I think 4 years, and then it took me another year. I was working I'd started painting, just to kind of make ends meet because the band wasn't making any money at all, and so I'd started painting, doing paintings of northeast buildings. But I'd always been into graffiti and stencils, and so I'd started hand cutting stencils, but of like modernist architecture, and doing them in like bold pop art colors. And so I built quite a career up. I was more than making ends meet as an artist. And so when I left the band
Can I just ask you something quickly, Felix? How were you selling those, and how were you marketing yourself as an artist?
I had sold I'd done a couple of pieces for the band that people had seen. Then I did a couple of big canvases. I learned how to stretch a canvas, and I did a couple of canvases for friends who were very successful club promoters who had wonderful new homes and they wanted big art. And so I did a couple of pieces for them. And on the back of that, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do some small stuff, but I'll do an exhibition, and I'll do it in a pub, because I was part of the whole like music scene. The music scene didn't take place in art galleries; it took place in pubs and bars. And so I did my first exhibition one night in the Fourth Hotel opposite the station in Newcastle, which was one of the kind of meccas for the Newcastle culture, music, art scene. Sold everything. Like that night, I think I had one piece left. I think I'd put 12 or 16 pieces on the walls around the pub. And I put a little bit of money down so that people could get a drink of a glass of wine when they came in, but I sold everything. And then on the back of that, managed to get a couple of pieces in a local gallery. And it was it was word of mouth, Back then it was like, there wasn't it wasn't easy to publish on the internet. There wasn't any YouTube, there wasn't any Facebook, there wasn't any well before any of that. So it was just word of mouth, and people. And the thing that you realize about art is that the more stuff you put on people's walls, the more interest you get, because they'll have friends around on a Saturday night and they'll be like, "Oh my God, where do you get that from?" Oh, Felix Holst, he's a friend of mine. Do you want his number? Because everyone loves to know an artist, right? And so again, and a little bit of it just came down to that kind of the same kind of marketing smarts that came from promoting club nights, and it was also, in Newcastle, we had a bit of a reputation now as a band. We weren't anonymous. So there was a little bit of a thing about Felix Holst from the Kustombuilt as an artist. And so when I quit the band, I built up quite a backlog of commissions. And so I worked through those through the summer. This would have been 2003. And at the end of 2003, I started looking for work in earnest. And I just so happened that I'd got my buddy Fraser, I'd got him a job in California when I decided I didn't want it. I'd got him a role. So he'd been out in California for 4 years. And I gave him a ping and said, what's the deal? Are they looking for anybody? And he was like, oh, actually, we've just got this new vice president in. He's a British guy. And he's not happy with the management, and I know that they're looking for managers, so I'll put you in touch. And it just happened very quickly, really. Like, I was booked in to go. I was booked in to fly out for interviews. I think in the kind of January timeframe, late January in 2004. Obviously, I knew a lot of people because of all of the time that I'd spent in California. It's like flying through and doing approvals, and I knew a lot of management because I'd been in front of management again and again and again. And so I did like a day of interviews with a lot of guys who actually would eventually work for me, or at the very least be peers. And then the VP and the SVP got the job, got very drunk. They put an offer in front of me that was like, I was like, how much? And this is like, I was like, yes, I was doing okay with my art, but I'd been on the dole in a band. It was when Tony Blair had announced that he would if you were in a band, that counted as looking for work, so you could sign on. And so
was that the time? Was that was around the time that they brought Noel into Number 10, right?
Okay. Yeah. And if you listen to there's a direct reference to that in Taking Care of Business, which was our first single.
I heard it. I heard Number 10 in that line. I heard that. Yeah. Okay.
Something like rock and roll at number 10. So I guess it's dead again. So it was just another. The big thing about that was, I was surprised how quickly I got. But then it was like network, right, which is a key thing. I had, without even knowing it, I had charmed a lot of management in the late 90s. And they remembered me partly because of my accent, but also because I got the job done. And I had this just absolutely fearless, I'll do anything attitude. Like, what? You need me to go to Hong Kong now instead of going home? Yep, I'm there. Not a problem. I've got my bag. The big thing was leaving the UK, right? The big thing was making the decision where I really only had two good friends in Los Angeles. Like, I didn't know anybody else. I had no network outside of Fraser and my friend Wayne, who was one of the US designers who I'd met on my last trip to LA. And it was a big thing for me. But also at the same time, the band had kind of broken up. It was a fairly kind of bitter split. And I just needed something. I just knew I needed adventure. I needed to get away from all of the things that now were beginning to feel like chains tying me down, that at one point had been the things that made me. And I went out there with a kind of, my mom's advice was like, look, give it a year. It's an adventure. It'll pass really quickly. Don't worry about it. And I was like, yeah, a year in the sunshine. Let's go. And that very quickly became, well, give it 3 years and you'll be back in 3 years. And the rest is that was the beginning of really the kind of certainly from a professional point of view, that's when it all just like lit. And the reason it lit was because everything that we've just talked about, or I was who I was at that point, right? Even I've said that if I hadn't done 4 years back with the Scallywags in a rock and roll band, and learn how to manage those guys, because I was the guy in the band. We had a manager, but I was the guy within the band making sure everybody got out of bed to get to the practice room. I was the guy who had the car. I was the guy who got us where we were going. And we had lots of fights about it. And I had to just make sure, I had to kind of manage these unruly characters in studio settings where you were working with very professional engineers and producers. And at the end of that, as soon as I touched down in Los Angeles, I realized that managing a bunch of kind of professionals was child's play compared to managing a wild, untamed rock and roll band. And then the other key bit of this transition was that I was due to come out. The job they wanted me to do was manage Hotwheels Adult, which was the collector line, right? And I was like, oh my God, they want me to manage Hotwheels Collector? Like, all I've got to do is worry about are those. And this is at the time of of dub culture, 22-inch rims on
West Coast
Chevelles,
Customs,
West Coast Customs, Wings West. The first Fast and the Furious movie had been out like a year, and the reason that they put me there was that it said on my immigration paperwork that they wanted to bring a more European global look at car culture to the brand, and that was like literally what I was there for, was to come and introduce a more global look at car culture. At the time, Hot Wheels was the all-American brand. Most of the guys working on the brand were older guys who'd been with it through the 80s. It was all muscle cars and hot rods, very few European cars, very few Japanese cars. And at the very last minute, my memory of it, right, but this is just a kind of dreamlike memory, was I was literally standing on the driveway with my trunk and my guitar ready to move to America. And my then boss calls me and said, we've made a change. You're going to go to New Jersey because we've decided to, we've changed your plane ticket because we've decided we're going to move Matchbox to the West Coast. Because Matchbox...
To the East Coast or...
To the West Coast. Matchbox were in New Jersey on the East Coast.
Okay.
Matchbox Tyco. And I'd worked on both Matchbox and Hot Wheels in my Leicester days. And I was like the only designer who had worked on both brands. They were very, very separate companies, really, under the Mattel umbrella. And so they were like, you're the only person who knows anything about Matchbox. So you're going to work on Matchbox. And I was like, man. I was like, I don't want to work on Matchbox. That's stuff that I had when I was a kid. I want to work on Hot Wheels. But, I was like, all right, send me to New Jersey. Like, I'm there. And so my first task was to, it's like in at the deep end, right? Like, look at the product line, look at the talent, decide how much product is viable, which designers should we make offers to relocate to New Jersey, and then move the design team across the country and have a new area in the design center in Los Angeles ready for Matchbox to arrive, 2 months later. And that was my first job. And in the process, keep the product line afloat and present Matchbox as a brand to Mattel global management and explain why it was a worthwhile. Everybody wanted to kill the brand. Everybody was like, "Why? Get rid of it, man! It's a distraction. We need Hot Wheels." And through passion, really, we rebuilt that brand from like 35 million a year, which was in Mattel terms is pretty much dead, to I think a few years later it was 140 million.
But Felix, can I just ask you? It's one thing having the balls to do something and the kind of I don't know, people skills, should we say, to go and handle a situation like that. But it's another thing to really be able to objectively look at the business case and then relay that with confidence to a set of executives as to why they should carry on investing it, and then to make a success of that. How did you have anybody that was kind of mentoring you through that process?
I think I was very lucky to have, I had a series of good marketing partners. That I'm always very careful when I talk about this stuff. This wasn't all me. I had a guy, John Coyne, who was a Brit, who was very, very aggressive and very we both found ourselves like managing the underdog brand, and we were both fighters. We liked that position. If you're on the underdog brand, you can't. It's all to win, right? It's all to play for. and I learned very quickly. I think, but I think part of it goes back to that, those days like promoting nightclubs. Um, just those are the kind of experiences in your life that give you a better understanding of what makes the world tick than if you just sit in your design bubble and all you want to do is make beautiful things, right? Whether you're designing, toasters and vacuum cleaners, or whether you're designing Bugattis. If you just sit and you're just all about the pretty pictures, and I don't say that with any, I'm not down on car designers at all, but I think sometimes you can get so focused on the thing that makes you better than everybody else, which is your wrist, right? That maybe you've missed opportunities to actually become better than everybody else because it's the full 360 that makes you really powerful in industry. And, I'm fortunate now, I'm in my late 40s and I've done a lot of stuff. But I like to think that most of the stuff I've done has been not just revolutionary or not just, brand defining, but also most of it is, there's always been a sense of marketability in everything I've ever done, right? When we get onto Hack Rod, a little bit different because we were really trying to push, the whole point of that exercise was to push the boundaries at the very cutting edge of bleeding technology. But everything we were doing was working towards how do we take all these things and make them marketable, a profitable solution. Because the fact of it is, in the world, for things to succeed, they have to be a profitable proposition, right? Otherwise, it is just art. But even my art, if it's not profitable, I ain't doing it. Like I feel, I've done enough of drawing for myself in my life. I need to offer something that people want, and that's for me. That's everything. Is like, can I make something that people want? And hopefully, whether it's in my career as a design leader or whether it's as an artist or even a musician, if people want it, then you can turn on. It's all about making something that people want. You turn on the profitability then, right?
Sure. But with regard, no, carry on.
But that comes from of always having your ears open to how the world works. And so standing up in front of management when I was, this is 2004, so I was like 32 years old. And being shouted down in front of there's 150 global executives telling you that you shouldn't be doing what you're saying, but we shut them all down. And the president of Mattel brand stood up in that meeting and said, "Whoa, everybody, quiet! Listen to what they're saying, because what they're saying is truth." And that bought us enough time to give us a year to implement some strategies that we were talking about that we knew were winning strategies. And then over the course of, I think it was probably the first 3 years, 4 years, we managed to grow that brand exponentially with good product strategy and good product.
Did you have any self-doubt in your ability to be able to execute that? Or was your key ally in Mr. Coin, I forget his first name, was he helping you see that this is what the market really wants and all we need to do is create that?
I think John, John was with me only for about a year and a half, and then he left the company. And in that first period of time, I think it was probably the first 3 years, I had 5 different marketing directors working with me. Like, they just kept rotating marketing directors through, which again was great for my network, because I suddenly had these guys all went off to be VPs or VPs in other and they're still good friends of mine, right? I could pick up the phone, and we were in the trenches together on the Underdog brand. But I think that John gave me the chance to cut my teeth with a lot of my ideas, and he gave me the confidence to know that I was good at what I was doing. And then after that, it was really from a product strategy perspective. I was very unique in terms of in Mattel in terms of a design leader, in that I was really a bit of a bulldog. I didn't like to be told what to do by marketing. I liked when it came to something that to me was very objective, right? Like, good design and good product development to me is objective. I know what I'm talking about. To a lot of other people, the things that they were passing comment on was subjective. Well, are you sure that color's right? I'm like, trust me, like, I know that color's right. Like, you don't like it because you just don't like the color green. I know, having done a lot of research, that color is perfect for that kid and for that blah, 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 right? And research getting very deep into consumer research and all of it. I used to just read the reports voraciously about what can I find out that mums are looking for, or kids are looking for, or or grown-up collectors are looking for.
Okay.
And that's the other big part of it, right? Research. If you have access to research, devour it, because it's not frivolity. This is the stuff where you find the insights that you can extrapolate and build winning strategies with. You've got to be careful because research. I pioneered upstream research certainly in the Wheels group, probably the boys group at Mattel, because it was being used as very downstream. Like, all right, we finished 3 prototypes. Now let's find out which one's best. And I was like, that's stupid, because if they're all crap, you're going to find out which is the best of the crap one. What you need to know is, do boys like dinosaurs more than pirates? And what does mum really want? Mum wants a toy that doesn't get strewn all over the floor every day. And so with that knowledge, you can then set out to develop winning product strategies, because you're answering a need from the consumer, and you're understanding what they like and they don't like, or their priorities, versus just waiting to spend $1 million on a prototype and then ask people if they like it. That's just makes no sense. So research, but then at the same time, once companies can become reliant on research, and that's something as a design leader you've got to walk a fine line. And that's when you get into the real fights, because my favorite quote is, it's become a fairly heavily used quote now, but Henry Ford's quote of if I'd asked the consumer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? Yeah. But it's true. It's so true. It's like, if you get too tied up on what the consumer is asking you for, one of the other big realizations that ties into that as well is that as a designer, there was a point when I realized that 95% of the people in the company could not see what didn't exist, right? They can't imagine it. 95% of people can't imagine something that doesn't exist. And so they immediately go to what does exist, and that's where they're safe. And so if you're asking at any point in your career through any form for someone to imagine something, you're probably screwed, right? That designers have a unique superpower that in their head they can see something that just doesn't fundamentally exist yet. Not many other people can.
And then crystallize it, yeah.
Yeah. You can't ask. So when you're doing a basic deck to present something, you've got to give people an idea of what it is they're discussing. And research can get very tangled in that world of we ask mums what they think, and they think, and it's but you're asking them about a completely new concept that hasn't existed before versus something they're happy with already. And they're never going to say, oh, no, we'll take the risk. So you've really got to kind of learn the language and the methodology to make sure that you're giving things an even keel, even if maybe neither of those concepts exist yet, but one of them's based in more tangible, historical data. Quite often, ordinary people will be like, "Oh yeah, that one feels good," rather than the thing that's way out there,
Felix, that notion is fascinating to me, because you've, in some respects, you've contradicted yourself, but you haven't, because you started out with this insight to say we really need to start with the end user to see exactly what they want. Then you get to a point where you realize there's a lot to be taken from that, but actually at some point, as you've highlighted, 95% of people, they can't visualize something that doesn't exist. So then it's your job as the designer that crystallizes that idea to present something that doesn't exist. You have to have the vision. How, again, these are things that are being talked about now by in big keynotes that are all over the internet. This is something that was really insightful of you to pick up on at that period with very limited resources. At what point did you realize, okay, this has worked up until a point, maybe we should pivot the way that we do things?